Hello everyone, my name's Ben and I teach people about the anatomy of lifting. Today, we're going to go over specifically how to fix overactive traps in motions like the dumbbell lateral raise or really any kind of raise. So the first thing that we need to do is start to bust some myths around what we actually mean by overactive and why muscles or why we perceive muscles to be overactive to begin with. First things first. Muscles aren't overactive or underactive. This is something that people commonly must understand, but contraction is not really something that we consciously create with our brain. Sure, we can consciously tell ourselves like, hey, I want to squeeze this muscle really hard, but in the context of weight room training, contraction is merely a response to joint position and force. And we'll talk about this in the context of a raise in just a second, but just think about it this way. We are not in the gym to consciously will ourselves to get bigger, right? If we were in the gym to get bigger that way, we would be just sitting there thinking about contracting our muscles the whole time. The reason we use weights and the reason we use external loads is to load our joints such that we target particular tissues in order to train those tissues, right? In other words, every exercise creates a muscular response. And the reason that we do different exercises is because different forces against different joints creates different muscular contraction. And so if you're feeling a muscle fatigue in an exercise, doesn't matter what exercise it is, but in this context, we're talking about trap fatigue and really something like a raise, it's happening for a reason. It's not random. And there is a specific reason that we're going to go over in just a second here that is actually happening. So what do we do about it and how do we understand it? Well, the first thing we need to understand is we need to understand the anatomy and we need to understand the physics. So now let's look at a model and now let's go over the specifics of a raise and specifically a dumbbell raise and how a dumbbell raise is going to be different from a cable raise and how we can fix those overactive traps of yours.
So start from that first principle that we just discussed, which is muscle contraction is actually a response to force based on joint position. So if we understand that, if we understand the anatomy of the delts and of the traps specifically, we can understand how to target these things differently. So understanding the delts, let's just say the middle delt for now, but this applies to all the delts in principle. If I'm going to target the middle delt, this yellow guy here, I'm going to do raises like this. Pretty simple. The middle delt runs from here to here and it brings these 2 points closer together, and so this is what happens. What does the middle delt not do? The middle delt does not move the entire shoulder girdle. The shoulder girdle is consisting of these 3 bones: clavicle, scapula, and upper arm. And basically what does move these bones in this upward direction when they contract? The traps, okay? So if we are using a resistance which encourages us to load this motion, then we're going to be loading the traps, plain and simple, specifically the upper traps and the middle traps. Both of those things, when they contract, because they run upward and sort of inward toward the spine this way, they're going to pull the whole shoulder girdle upward in what you would traditionally think of as a shrug. You can know that just by doing it, just feel it, okay? So how, and this is really the question, how will we load the middle deltoid as opposed to the traps in something like a raise? Because if we're holding a dumbbell, what is the dumbbell trying to do to us? Imagine that Frank here has a dumbbell in his hand. What does the dumbbell want to do to his arm if he's holding it? Well, the dumbbell wants to pull his arm like this, off his body, okay? Downward like this. And so how do we have to resist against that downward force? With muscles that pull upward like this. So right out of the gate, if you're doing a traditional dumbbell lateral raise where you're holding a dumbbell at your side, you're already asking your traps to do a ton of work. And really the dumbbell only picks up its resistance on the shoulder, specifically this joint right here, when your arm is all the way out here. So if that was confusing, basically the middle delt dumbbell lateral raise is really a trap dominant movement. Of course there's some middle delts involved. Of course it's a solid exercise for training these guys to some degree, but it's not really going to optimally load the middle delts. What would we actually want to do if we were to try to load these middle delts specifically? Well, we would want a resistance that was perfect for loading this motion. Don't overcomplicate this. Just think about, okay, here's the anatomy, here's the motion that that particular muscle creates. How would I load this? Well, I could, basically have something that was smushing my arm into my body this way. And how would I do that? Well, all I would need to do is I would need to put a resistance in my hand or around my arm somewhere, and I would need that the resistance to be smushing me horizontally inward to my body. So that could be a cable lateral raise, and we'll go over examples in just a second. That could be a cable lateral raise where the cable is angled across me. That could be a dumbbell lateral raise where I'm sort of lying down on my side, right? And I'm doing it with a single arm this way. In any case, you just want a resistance direction, which is smushing your arm into your body, not which is pulling your arm away from your body. So that's the key principle takeaway here. is the way that we get to the muscle response in the middle delt as compared to the upper and the middle traps predominantly. And again, both will be involved in all these situations because both of these muscles contract and control the shoulder girdle and they need to work in concert. But what we're talking about is how do we create a rate limiter in an exercise? So if we're going to create a rate limiter in the middle delts in an exercise, we need a specific load direction which pushes our arm into our rib cage in a variety of different directions. We don't want a resistance direction which is pulling our shoulder upward and downward like this as in a traditional shrug. So again, we'll go over examples in just a second, but if you're doing it with cables, angle the cable across your body that way. You can use one arm or two arms. And if you're using a dumbbell, right, lie basically on your side such that you're angling the dumbbell this way. And again, that dumbbell just ends up doing something very, very similar to what the cable exercises we're going to demonstrate now do.
So now that you understand the first principles of trap anatomy, delt anatomy, and then how we can actually load the shoulder such that we don't recruit as much of the traps as the deltoids in any kind of raise, let's look at some very practical examples and illustrations of how that might actually look. So here on the left is an example of me doing a cable lateral raise, and I'm sort of leaned up against this machine. And what you'll note is that the angle between my arm and the cable toward the bottom, boom, right here, is what? 90 degrees. So much like we talked about, in the practical application section of the anatomy stuff, I'm using a direction of resistance here, which is actually pushing my arm into my body. I'm not using a direction of resistance, which is angled down toward the floor. The equivalent of that in this particular case was if I had the cable angled this way, sort of parallel to my arms, right? Against which I could basically just do a shrug. So remember, arm gets smushed into body. That's really how we're going to optimally train the deltoids relative to the traps. Again, as I mentioned, traps will be involved. They are the joint managers for the deltoids, and they are very important. But again, if we're feeling them disproportionately, there is an issue there. Here's another example. This was me just on a lat pull down. One day, all the cables and the dumbbells that I wanted to use were taken. So here was my solution. I basically used this low pulley, and what do you know? It was basically perfect when I sat down so that I could optimize for that close to 90-degree angle where that cable, in essence, is just essentially smushing my arm against my body. Another comment that I want to make, because there's a discrepancy between these two videos, is that in this example over here, I have the D handle looped over top of my wrist and over or the top of my hand. And in this example here, I'm actually using a cuff. Either option is totally fine. Don't feel like you need to constrain yourself to either. Both are great. You can grab the handle if you want, but this is just how I like to do it personally. And then last thing, here's just another example in a sort of different plane of motion. Same idea. You can't see it perfectly, but if I pause here in the bottom, you can basically see how that cable would be 90 degrees for my arm in the bottom. So even when I'm doing a raise, which is sort of more of a Y raise out to the side as opposed to a traditional looking lateral raise, I'm still applying this principle of arm getting smushed into the body and not arm getting pulled away from the body. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope you learned something. If you liked it, please subscribe. Please check out my community in the description below. If you want to learn more from me, there's a 7-day free trial option for you in there. We already have over 50 members who are interacting constantly every day, asking questions, getting one-on-one personalized help from yours truly. So I hope to see you in the community, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you all in the next one.